Welcome to the Lost Boys, the Found Fathers podcast. I'm Gabriel O'Sullivan, and joining me is my co-host and friend, Will Haycox. We are men who have suffered the loss of a child, and through this production, we desire to offer encouragement, strength, and hope to our fellow brothers who have traveled the same journey. Welcome, Will.
Good morning, Gabe.
Good morning. So we are working on a topic called Intentional Fatherhood. We've been in this for a couple weeks here. And we're going to continue that today with a topic called investing in spiritual growth. So, Will, I'm going to let you go ahead and open us up for this one.
Yeah, just kind of reiterating, since for us it's been a few weeks since we recorded. Just so if you haven't stayed up on these episodes, like Gabe said, this is an Intentional Fatherhood series, and so we're providing some general tips and general advice. Also just some practical tips and just kind of what does it mean to be engaged, what does it mean to be a good role model, what does it mean to spend time loving your kids well and being a good father. And so we've talked about several different aspects of that. I believe this is the 6th episode in this series, so make sure you go back and listen from the beginning. And like you said, this one is about investing in spiritual growth. And I guess to sum up the whole idea here that I was going with is to make practicing your faith a habit, or make practicing your faith in front of your children a habit. And so I think that's kind of the general idea. One of the practical ways to do this, and I think if you spend any time in church, or at least Southern Baptist churches where we grew up and where we go with our families now, probably heard a lot of, if you're a father, you probably heard a lot about, having a family devotion, having a family Bible study, having some sort of resources, or, whether your church puts out family resources, or if you've looked for something on Facebook, if you're a part of a Facebook group, wherever you got it, if you search for Google, like how do I lead family devotional, or, what is a family devotional? I think that's one of the big things that I wanted to talk about here, is just, I guess, demystifying that, or making that a little easier to understand. Because I know for me it seemed difficult, and still sometimes, seems like if I'm going to do a family devotional, like it has to be perfectly prepared, and it has to be, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to take this difficult concept of whatever, resurrection, and teaching my kids about forgiveness of sins. And then I have to take that all the way down to the level, my kids are 3 and 5 months old. So obviously the 5-month-old isn't going to understand a lot, but I have to go all the way down to the level of a 3-year-old and explain resurrection or the forgiveness of sins or something like that to my 3-year-old. And, take that to whatever age your kids are. But it can feel like a very complicated task, very difficult task to take that and help your kids understand finer points of theology, or even just the gospel. But I think, I'll let you jump in here, Gabe, but I think especially at the age my kids are, maybe younger than 5, 6, 7, 8, the more important thing than getting the message perfectly right and perfectly tailored to their age group is just doing it. Just showing your kids, we read the Bible. We're a family that reads the Bible. We're a family that cares about Jesus, cares about learning about him, and that we're going to do this together. We're going to make it a part of our lives and a habit.
Yeah, it's good. I mean, just getting in that routine matters. Even if it's not every single night, which ours is not, but if it's a few nights a week, like that routine matters. And there's certainly great resources out there, like little children's, devotion Bibles that are definitely age kind of specific, and we've used those. There's one called Jesus Storybook Bible, which I love. It's really neat, got great stories, and it really, it's got pictures and stuff in it, and each story really somehow, like, they use it to tie it back to Jesus, which is great. So even Old Testament stuff that they have in there, they'll explain like what does that look like in the larger, meta narrative of the gospel. And so that's a great resource, and so we've used that through the years. And even if you don't have like the devotion Bible, even just starting with like, okay, we're gonna get in, and read a few verses of scripture, out of the Bible, and then even if we don't even take the time to necessarily explain it, if it's not something super kind of difficult to grasp, or like if you're reading something in the Psalms or you're reading something about Jesus' life, I mean, those for a younger kid, again, just getting the word into their hearts and into their minds and into their brains, like that's what we're shooting for here.
And I would also say too, like, I guess to make it easier, I'm sitting here thinking like, what could you read, outside of these kids' Bibles with the cartoons? And that's fine, it's age appropriate. But maybe as kids get a little older, I would never recommend the Message translation for adults, but it was written for kids. What's his name?
Okay.
Peterson, I think was his last name. He wrote the Message in order to help his children understand the Bible better. And I think in that context, it is a perfectly useful translation. But as they age out of that, transition to whatever, NIV, ESV, NASB, something that is more accurate, more literal, but it can be a little harder to understand. I was just sitting here thinking like, we should read the Gospels to our kids, and I'm just imagining reading a passage about whatever, Jesus healing a person with leprosy, or the Pharisees, wanted to carry him out and stone him, to my 3-year-old isn't going to be super successful. So I think, finding a Message translation and just reading that to your kids, it's written, like I say, to children, so it's very common language. It's very easy to understand. It's very conversational. Again, it's not as literal or as accurate, and he takes some liberties with how he words and phrases he uses. But just for the sake of having something that your 5, 6, 7, 8-year-olds and under can understand easily, I think the Message would be something you could just get and read together at night.
That's good. What about this next point? You said a father must model a vibrant faith and nurture a personal relationship with God. What does that look like, modeling a vibrant faith?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of things to that, and we could spend the rest of the podcast on it, but kind of the example I told you before the podcast, Gabe, is, and maybe this is just in my Southern Baptist context, if so, I apologize, but you see when you're at church on Sunday morning, often you see a lot of men who have their hands in their pockets, or just hands down by their sides. They're singing, but the only thing that's moving is their mouth. They don't look happy about it.
Or even not.
Or they may not even be singing.
Standing there with their mouths closed, like looking mad at the world.
And I don't understand, and not to overanalyze that, but I don't understand if men think it's not masculine to sing, if they're uncomfortable with their voice, if they whatever. I don't know what the issue is, and not to throw anything on anybody who does that. But I remember somebody saying to me when I was a teenager or somewhere around there, like it's important for men, and they weren't saying it to me, they were talking to the parents, but saying, let your kids see you making yourself a fool for God, essentially, is kind of that idea. And I remember thinking back, like my dad certainly wasn't perfect, and I'm not a perfect father, but I think he did a good job when I remember growing up of when we were singing on Sunday mornings. He wasn't making a show of himself and raising his hands and screaming and jumping up and down, in the aisles or whatever, but he allowed the Spirit to lead him in worship, that he was always singing. If the Spirit led him to raise his hands in praise, he did that, and so I think that's a small example, and it may be something you're very uncomfortable with, but I think this idea of like allowing your children to see you outside of your comfort zone, or doing something the world would see as quote unquote foolish, or something that makes you uncomfortable, for the sake of worship, for the sake of modeling Christ's love and that you are a slave to Christ, I think is important, and more important than whether someone behind you or in front of you hears your voice. You're like, wow, that sounds terrible. Like, you might sound terrible. I'm not saying you don't, but I don't think the Lord is concerned with what your singing voice sounds like. I think he's concerned with you submitting to him and surrendering your pride, your fear, whatever it is, so you can honor him, and so your kids can see that it's more important that you honor God than look cool.
Now, I love that, man, and I think about another kind of take on that too, about modeling that walk. It's obviously in how do we treat them, how do we speak to them, how do we treat their mother, how do we speak to their mother, like how do they see us interacting with drivers on the road, right? Like, how do we what do they hear us speaking about our work, as well? Like, are we teaching them that we find joy in that, or that we at least work hard for the glory of God, even if we're not finding joy in what we're doing for work? Like, those are a lot of different ways that we can model it. And I would say, kind of back to the devotion thing, like, do your kids know that you have a daily quiet time with the Lord? Do your kids know that and what does that look like? Do they know that you spend time in prayer, before the Lord? And how do they know that unless we actually maybe spend some time teaching them, hey, this is how Daddy has his time with the Lord every day. Okay, I spend some time in prayer, spend some time reading the Word, spend some time writing about what I've just read in the Word, spend some more time in prayer, like showing them how to have that quiet time. Just, again, like you're discipling your kids, just like you would disciple another guy. And that discipling is teaching, is modeling. Do your kids sometimes get up early and come downstairs and see you, at the kitchen table with, on your hands and knees praying? Do they see you sitting at the kitchen table, writing in your journal and reading the Bible? Are they seeing that being modeled out for them too? Not that we're like, oh, okay, kid's about to wake up, let me pretend like I'm having a quiet time here. It's not that. The Bible talks about us getting into our closet to pray, so we're not making a public spectacle of it. But if your kids come down and see you having a quiet time, like, that's not a bad thing, either. And so we want to let them know that, hey, this is something that Daddy does, and this is something that would be good for you to do as well. Now, sometimes the kids are going to be all in for that, and there's going to be seasons of their life where they're just like not interested at all. And we have to, I'm learning to be patient with the kids that are in that season where they could care less right now, right? I'm praying for their heart to be turned, towards the Lord, and want to have that desire to spend time with Him. And but those are, again, a couple of ways I think that we can model it, through our attitudes, through our actions, through our words, about life in general, towards them, towards their mom, towards our work, towards, again, pedestrians, whatever the case may be. And then I think too, like, what do they see as being our main focus? Like, do they see our main focus being money and materialism and acquiring things, acquiring wealth, acquiring trips, vacation, post likes? Like, what do they see? What do they hear us talking about? Or do they see us putting the gospel first, in the way that we communicate, again, obviously with them, the way that we live our lives, the way that we spend our money? I think that's another way that we can model it. How would you say that we can show them that way just with our daily life?
Yeah, I think I was thinking something while you were talking there, and it still ties into exactly the question you just asked. Like, I think our kids see, I think we all know that our kids see a lot more, pick up on a lot more than we think they do. I'm in the age where, like, Bonnie, our daughter, she just, I don't know, it's been a couple of months or something like that, and we were watching a show or something, and I don't remember what happened, and she said, "Oh my God." And it's like, where'd you hear that? Like, we haven't been telling you that. And so it's like, she spent some time with some friends not long before then, and some girls, and a couple of them are older than her, so she probably thought, they said, "Oh my God," and they're cool. And so even at 3 years old, she's still picking up, like, okay, I'm going to say that. So on the bad side, that's where your kids, and we're all kids. We all grew up and learned things we shouldn't have learned. Your kids are going to learn from somebody the cuss words out there. Your kids are going to learn probably things about body parts you don't want them to learn. They're going to learn from kids in middle school, whatever. There's going to be a lot of influences out there they pick up on. So on the other side, model what it means to be a Christ-like father. Take these steps to show who you are. And back to the point and the question you're asking, the conversations you have with your wife at home, not like, let's go stand in front of the kids and have these conversations, but just the conversations you have, unless you're in a 10,000 square foot house. And if you are, invite me over. But unless you're in a 10,000 square foot house, your kids are hearing the conversations you're having. And so through those conversations, are your kids getting the idea that mommy and daddy argue about money all the time, and they're so stressed out about, can we take this vacation or that vacation? Can we buy this new car even though we got a brand new car? Whatever. Like, are they worried about that? Or are they talking about, like, we have this stressful situation coming up with work, with family, with whatever, and mom and dad are talking about, what's the wisest thing to do for our family? What would God have us do? They're praying over it. They're talking about, what has the Lord been telling you about this or that? Like, your kids, depending on their age, probably don't know what it means to say, where's God leading you in this? But they're hearing you talk about God, Him leading you, and they're seeing that it's important enough for you and your wife to have those conversations, and that's modeling to them, it matters what God thinks about this, and it matters that I am focusing my decision making around what God thinks rather than, how much money are we making this year? Can we do this vacation? Can we do this? Can we do that? So I think that's part of that.
That's good.
Integrating your faith into daily life and your decision making. Obviously, we've already talked about that in other series, and then in this one, just like making wise decisions as a father and leading your family well. But kind of like you talked about, and maybe you do, maybe there's a time for this, but you're not necessarily sitting down your whole family and saying, like, all right, we have $3,000 extra this year. Are we going to use that for a vacation? Are we going to use that for a camping trip, save some money, and we're going to take $1,000 and donate to this charity or that charity or to the church? And you sit down with your kids and you have a checklist of all the fruits of the Spirit, and you sit there and you're like, all right, does this model love? Does this model, peace, joy, patience? Or does it model the opposite? Are we using this in a hateful way or an unloving way? Like, you're not necessarily having to sit down and say, I'm going to integrate faith into everyday life and my decision-making processes by making my kids go through a fruit of the Spirit checklist. But you're living in a way that your kids are seeing, just like we were talking about a minute ago with the conversations you're having. My parents are talking about God, what He thinks, and how He would lead them, more than, do we have money for this? No, let's argue about it. So I think there's stuff like that. And then I had just a conversation, or just a note here about not missing the chance to teach your kids about God in the mundane or in the normal everyday. And I think that goes right along with that you're taking the opportunity. Say you got a promotion at work, you got your hours cut on the other side, maybe you got a bonus, maybe something, your taxes came back bigger than you were going to. There's nothing wrong with using those blessings to spend some time together as a family on a vacation or something. But in this random occurrence of you have a little bit extra money, are you using that and you're having conversations with your wife, with your kids about what can we do with this to bless other people and show the love of Christ? And maybe in a smaller, like more everyday situation, like you talked about, when you're driving down the road, if say you're on a family road trip, whatever, you're going to somewhere in North Carolina, you're going to Wally World, yes, like everybody would want to go. And so you're driving and somebody cuts you off. If you're in a happy mood and you're, loving dad and everything's great, and then somebody cuts you off and that's just like the end of it. The whole trip is ruined. You're flipping the guy off, you're yelling, you're mad, you're talking to your wife, I can't believe people are so stupid, just ridiculous. Just idiots like that shouldn't be able to drive, and you're just in a bad mood for the next hour. your kids see a lot of things about you, but they're seeing you're not modeling love of Christ. You're easily angered. You're easily distracted for spending time with them, from loving them, to now being frustrated. You're going to be short with them. There's all these things that go with it. Or you can just let it roll off your back, have no concern about what someone else does that may or may not be stupid and annoying, and go on loving your family and living and showing them a Christ-like love. So I think there's a lot of and then I thought about this going as far as if you're going hiking with your kids, if that's something you and your family do, taking a minute to stop and appreciate God's creation, that you're showing your kids the sunset over there, the sunrise, which maybe you wouldn't be able to get your kids up that early, but you're saying this view out here. I did a lot of hiking. I was in Boy Scouts and Cub Scouts and all that when I was a kid, and so I think my parents did a good job of saying, God made all this. He made the trees. He made this river, this stream that we're playing in. You just talked about a church camp you went to, that I know is a beautiful place. I went a long time ago. Mm-hmm. And so like taking the opportunity just to tell your kids, which they probably don't grasp what it means, but just to tell your kids, God made this, and he did it because he's a creator, he's loving, and he also wants us to enjoy and see his creation and see his power through that. So I think, the little things you say are not throwaway comments, and they're picked up on just as much as, back to what I was saying earlier, the negative things that your kids hear or the things you wish your kids wouldn't hear are picked up on quickly, and they start saying things around the house, and you're like, where did that come from? So like, let's turn that on its head and tell them about Christ, and that might stick in their minds just as easily.
That's good. And and I just want to throw this out there. The reason that we're having these conversations is not because we feel like y'all need to hear it, right? It's because we need to hear this ourselves, right? We're still learning to be fathers ourselves, and these are some things that we know that we want to be better at, that we want to do better, we want to model better as we try to grow in our faith, and as we try to grow in our parenting, in our and as being fathers. I was talking to a patient yesterday, and we have children kind of about the same age, a couple of ours. She's got 3 boys, we've got 2 boys and a daughter, but she was talking about how she's like, they didn't give you when you have a baby, they don't also give you this parenting journal. It's like, this is exactly how you do it. She's like, I had to tell I'd have to tell my boys sometimes, like, hey, I'm learning just like you're learning, because I'm learning how to be a parent. So that's kind of what we're saying is that we're all up in this thing together. Okay, we're trying to learn how to be better parents, better dads, better husbands, better men, and so that's why we're doing this. Not because we think we've got all the wisdom, but we believe God's word has the wisdom, and then we're trying to pick it apart ourselves and then be able to apply it to our lives, and we hope that that'll make a difference for those that are listening.
Yeah, that's great.
So, we'll kind of end this episode here. We're going to continue on with this Intentional Fatherhood, another episode or two. So make sure you go back and check out the ones that you may have not already heard, and then catch up with us on the next ones as well. We appreciate you joining us. Make sure that you follow us on social media, Facebook, Instagram, and X. And certainly you can check out my books, That Will Be Done, or also Every Little Thing, 6 Small Steps to Perfect Peace. You can find those on Amazon and other places books are sold. Thanks for joining us today. Let's not be lost. Let's be found in Him.